My grandmother grew up in a place that doesn't exist anymore. It was a town of 8,000 people, assembled in the night and disappearing just as quickly. The United States government called it the Rohwer War Relocation Center, but to my grandmother, it was simply known as camp. How she came to live in camp from 1942 to 1945 is a story with many sides. A young Japanese-American girl was transplanted from Southern California to Eastern Arkansas with a few pit stops along the way. It is a story of a family ripped apart and put back together, of those in power and those at their whim. It is a story of hatred and hope, of great loss and of undeniable perseverance. This is a story of American survival. This is the story of that journey. My grandmother, Yuriko Kamiya, is born on Good Friday, 1935, in Long Beach, California, as the first child of Kaie and Waseko Kamiya. Her younger brother, Eiichi, is born the following year. Her sister, Yosi, is born in 1940. The young family enjoys the small fruits of life during this period. In 1938, the family moves to 3001 Hathaway Drive, living on the property of the Japanese school where Kaie and Waseko teach. Yuriko begins kindergarten at Robert E. Lee Elementary School. This is the start of her early childhood memories.
So I entered kindergarten as the only Japanese-speaking child of the entire school. When you are 5 in kindergarten, you are at a point in life where you want to socialize with other children, but I lack the skills to communicate.
From an early age, she works to assimilate into American culture. She is the eldest child and the first in her family to grow up in the United States.
I memorized all the songs and rhymes and the routine of the classroom, and I was able to go home and teach my brother, sometimes not knowing what the lyrics meant or what the poems meant, but we were able to recite them.
Yuriko's ability to Americanize would soon be tested by her peers, her community, and her country.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
On this particular Sunday, Yuriko is at a wedding with her family. The FBI raids the reception for members of the Japanese American community. Kaie is spared because he is a U.S. citizen.
Everybody went home, and there was a lot of fear about what that meant when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
When the Kamiya family returns home on December 7, 1941, they do what many families do. They brace for war. But what that means for Japanese Americans starkly contrasts with the rest of the nation.
For days, my parents would be out in back, and in those big metal barrels, they were trying to burn the Japanese school textbooks. But if you just throw books into a pile and set them on fire, they don't all burn. So they had to rip out the pages from the books and throw them into these barrels for them to burn. They also burned anything that was reminiscent of Japan. There were family pictures, there were certificates that my father was awarded from the Japanese government for teaching Japanese language in the U.S. Those were all burned. So flags, those were burned.
The fears of the Kamiya family are not unfounded. They are under suspicion. The U.S. Census Bureau actively collaborates with the government to provide the locations of Japanese Americans. The FBI had sought to access personal civilian data as early as 1939.
Yes. Shortly after the war broke out, there was an FBI car at the end of our road. There's two men in them day and night to watch the movement of people of Japanese ancestry. My aunt happened to be visiting us from the San Jose area, and she went home and was followed all the way back. There was much suspicion at the time.
The Kamiyas know they are being watched. Not long after, they are interrogated.
It was actually in the evening, and it was already dark, but FBI agents came into our house and told us we had to all sit in the living room. And they went from room to room, cupboard to cupboard, drawers, and dumping everything out, looking for I don't know what. They didn't find anything that incriminated my parents, but they did take my father with them. They took him away, and we didn't know where. They didn't tell my mother when she would see him again. And so we just considered it a lost.
Kaya is taken to White Point Immigration Facility and then to Terminal Island Prison in Long Beach. He is fingerprinted, dressed in a prison uniform, and has his mugshot taken. Only by convincing prison officials that he needs medicine is he allowed to call home. It is then, with the help of Kaya's friend John Papp, a white lawyer, that Kaya is released. Kaya is not charged with any crime here nor during the length of his life.
He was able to join us before we were sent away, so that was a blessing for our family, that we had our dad with them.
Following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese sentiment intensified. It was built upon a long history of xenophobia. Asians were viewed as unassimilable in American society as an inherently inferior and undesirable race.
Japanese Americans understood the hysteria that was rampant in the media, as well as in the law. That radio, the newspapers, all showed Japanese Americans as evil, sneaky, and all portrayal of that group was negative. So it's no wonder that it didn't take long for the public at large to take on that attitude. When the war broke out, of course it was bad news for everyone, but particularly Japanese Americans, because they were easy to pick out. Their names, their faces were very easy to be subject of any kind of discrimination or what we call hate crimes today. Being called a Jap by other kids or by adults was hurtful.
To my grandmother, the United States has always been home. Japan is a foreign country. She is an American citizen. She identifies as American. The rest of the nation did not see her this way. To them, she was a foreigner, an enemy.
Japanese Americans tried their best to show their loyalty to America.
It was not enough. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. Executive Order 9066 empowers the military to create defense zones to protect the United States from espionage and sabotage. The legislation intends to remove Japanese Americans from the United States West Coast. Japanese are required to register their families with the government. They are given numbered tags to be attached to each piece of luggage. They may bring only what they can carry. Their destination is undisclosed. The Kamiya family is ordered to report to downtown Long Beach in 1 week. They have 1 week to liquidate their possessions.
We were given 5 days to prepare to be evacuated. The government storage was available. My mother's piano, my father's roll-top desk, large objects were sent to the government storage. But meanwhile, you have art objects, things that you really can't assign to a storage area. So people came to the house and walked through and offered nickels and dimes for vases, dolls, anything that they liked. And the residents were at their mercy because you couldn't carry it in. You were allowed one suitcase per person, and you had no idea what the environment was like that you were going to move to. So most people packed their nice clothes and they went in. Here domestically, we did not have our bank accounts available to us, so that people who had farms or businesses had a hard time because they couldn't make payments. They couldn't purchase anything in preparation. So many of the farms were lost because nobody was able to take over when the farmers went into camps.
On April 5th, 1942, the Kamiyas report to downtown Long Beach and are ordered to drive caravan-style to Santa Anita Racetrack. Upon arrival, Kaya is told personal vehicles are not allowed. He sells his 1936 Chevrolet to a soldier for $35. The car was $575 retail. The family is assigned one whitewashed stable with double doors. Trucks drop off military canvas cots to be assembled. Leftover hay is used to stuff mattresses. 2 light bulbs hang inside the stable. A few rolls of toilet paper are thrown in. As a 5-year-old, Eiichi enjoyed life with his parents and 2 sisters at their family home in Long Beach. He wakes on the morning of his 6th birthday, on April 6, 1942, in a horse stall, imprisoned by guards and owning a single suitcase of material possessions. Yuriko's 7th birthday is just 13 days later. She spends it slightly differently. Prior to the forced evacuation, Eiichi had contracted chickenpox.
Any communicable disease was suspicious. Of course, you're going into a group setting. So an ambulance came and they took my sister and I away from the family. And I remember getting into the back of the ambulance and looking, and I saw my parents standing at the back. And it's the first time I remember seeing my mother crying as they took her 2 children away.
Yuriko and her 18-month-old sister, Yosi, are sent to Los Angeles General Hospital, where they stay for 2 weeks to recover. Their parents are not notified of their location or release.
My parents and my brother went to the main gate of Santa Anita every day to see if my sister and I were coming back to camp from the hospital. And every day, we weren't coming. When we finally arrived in Santa Anita, my sister had forgotten my mother because she had been sleeping next to me for 2 weeks. And for the first night in the stables, my sister would not go to my mother, and she slept next to me. It was a heartbreaking moment for my mom to finally see a child who she hadn't seen for 2 weeks and then not be accepted.
The first night in the stables, once Yuriko and Yosi returned, is the second time Moseko would cry. During the time the Kamiyas are held at Santa Anita Temporary Assembly Center, the living conditions do not improve.
I remember the smell of the stables. You can take the horses out, but that smell lingers. We were in the stables the time we were there. They were long buildings. And they had large air holes that went from unit to unit, swinging doors, you know, the half doors like that you see with horses. You could hear people talking, babies crying. There was no privacy, really, especially since you had to shower in these horse washing places. Bathrooms were a long walk. The women and men were separated, and our showers were where they washed the horses near the main stadium. We had to walk through insecticides to go into the showers, and the shower heads stood quite a distance from the wall because horses were walked into there. And I think most Japanese people like to take baths, and so when you went to camp, any of the camps, there were showers because that's what was built. We ate in a mess hall, and you had to wear these colored badges. We had a blue badge with a number 3 on it. That meant you went to the blue mess hall and you were with the 3rd shift. And it was hot. I remember people would just kind of pass out sometimes while you're in line, these long lines waiting for your meal.
Japanese Americans endure and persist in life at Santa Anita. Children, too, are forced to find a way to survive inside the prison center.
We had what was considered school in Santa Anita, which meant you went up and sat on the stadium seats by age or grade, and some volunteer from camp would be in front. Some adult would teach us songs because we had no equipment, and our recess was playing on the pari-mutuel bars where people lined up to place bets. That was our playground, so we'd climb on those bars, run around. There was a statue of a horse. I think it was Seabiscuit up in front. We'd run around. So we adapted as kids. Now for adults, it was really a terrible experience.
After 5 months at the Santa Anita Temporary Assembly Center, the Kamiyas are once again forcibly moved by the U.S. government.
We were loaded onto trains from Santa Anita, and we didn't know where we were getting sent. But we were on a train, and trains at that period had no air conditioning. You didn't have the conveniences that they have today. So we sat upright in the seats, and we went through deserts. There were a lot of dry areas and heat as we traveled. Every car had the armed soldiers. Then we were quite afraid of, because they looked so big to us and they had weapons. People were very careful.
The Kamiyas arrive in southern Arkansas at the Jerome War Relocation Center on October 11, 1942. They are the camp's first residents. Jerome, however, is not permanent for the Kamiyas, as they are once again packed up and moved a month later to their final destination of the Japanese American internment. On November 23, 1942, the Kamiyas arrive at the Rohwer War Relocation Center. This will be their home until July 26, 1945. In 1945, after their release from Rohwer, the Kamiya family returns to Los Angeles. At age 37, with a wife and 4 young children, Eiichi Kamiya is forced to start over. The forced evacuation upended the lives of all Japanese Americans on the West Coast, including that of my family.
Because both of my parents were American born, they had certain privileges of citizenship. However, being Japanese Americans did not protect them from the evacuation. All people were any part Japanese were considered part of the group to be evacuated.
The Kamiyas were just 6 individuals out of over 120,000 Japanese Americans to be incarcerated during World War II. It is the largest violation of constitutional rights in American history.
So it was a total loss.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.